The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, and for a split second, the entire ballroom went silent. Not because of the glass. Nobody cared about that. They went silent because of what my daughter-in-law had just said about me, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is that annoying beggar we are forced to put up with." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt my knees buckle, felt the heat rush to my face, felt every pair of eyes in that glittering reception hall turn toward me. And then came the laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not polite laughter. Real, genuine amusement, like I was the punchline to a joke I didn't even know I was part of. My son's wedding. The happiest day of his life. And there I was, being introduced to my new daughter-in-law's wealthy parents like I was some kind of charity case they'd taken pity on. She stood there in her $1,000 dress, her perfect hair catching the chandelier light, her hand gripping my arm like I was an accessory she couldn't wait to put away. Her parents, both dripping in designer everything, looked at me with that particular kind of pity rich people give to those they think are beneath them. Her mother's smile was thin and polite. Her father's eyes barely registered my existence. I wanted to disappear. To melt into the floor. To wake up and realize this was all just a nightmare. But then something shifted. Her father's expression changed. His eyebrows drew together, confusion replacing that polite distance. He tilted his head slightly, squinting at me like he was trying to place my face. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the scattered laughter. "Aren't you the mysterious investor who bought our company last year?" The laughter died instantly. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive ballroom. Every champagne glass stopped mid-sip. Every conversation froze. My daughter-in-law's grip on my arm went slack. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint right there on the spot. Her mother's polite smile cracked like old paint. Her father stared at me with dawning recognition, his mouth slightly open. If you've ever watched someone's entire world crumble in real time, you know what I saw in my daughter-in-law's eyes right then. Pure, undiluted panic. What?" she stammered, looking between me and her father like she was trying to solve an impossible equation. She can't be." But I didn't say a word. I just stood there, meeting her father's gaze with the calm of someone who'd spent years learning how to rebuild herself from nothing. The woman they'd called a beggar, the annoying burden they claimed to tolerate out of obligation, was the same woman who now controlled the future of their family business. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The whispers started then, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I could see heads turning, people pulling out phones, probably Googling my name right there at the reception. My son, standing across the room with his new wife, looked completely lost, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been shame. You see, what nobody at that wedding knew, what even my own son didn't fully understand, was how I'd gotten here. How the woman they'd all written off as weak, needy, dependent, had quietly fought her way back from being completely erased. They didn't know about the years I'd spent invisible, about the paperwork that had stolen my life, about the brother-in-law who'd smiled while he dismantled everything my late husband and I built together. They didn't know I'd been someone before I became nothing. And they definitely didn't know how hard I'd worked to become someone again. My daughter-in-law tried to recover, letting out a forced laugh that sounded more like a choke. "Dad, you must be confused. This is Thomas's mother. She's..." "Seraphine Delacroix," her father interrupted, his voice sharp. "That's your name, isn't it? You're the one who acquired controlling interest in Hartwell Industries 6 months ago. The deal that saved us from bankruptcy." More gasps rippled through the crowd. My daughter-in-law looked like she might be sick. Her mother had gone completely rigid, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. I could have gloated. Could have thrown their cruelty back in their faces. Could have made a scene that would have ruined the entire reception. But I'd learned something important over these past few years of fighting to reclaim my life. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. Real justice doesn't need to scream. So I simply smiled. A small, quiet smile that said everything I needed to say. "It's nice to finally meet you properly," I told her father, my voice steady and calm. "Your daughter has told me so much about your family." The weight of that statement settled over everyone nearby. The implication was clear. I'd known exactly who they were this whole time. I'd sat through the insults, the dismissal, the cruel laughter, all while holding cards they didn't even know were in play. My daughter-in-law's carefully constructed mask was cracking right down the middle. And that was just the beginning of what she was about to discover. Because what happened at that wedding, that public moment of recognition and reversed humiliation, was only the surface. The real story, the one that explained how a woman labeled as a beggar ended up controlling her daughter-in-law's family fortune, went much deeper and darker than anyone in that ballroom could have imagined. And that was the moment the mask began to crack. If you were standing in my shoes right then, with everyone staring, with your daughter-in-law realizing her world was about to fall apart, what would you have said next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because you won't believe what happens when the truth finally comes out. Retry you. I wasn't always the woman they called a beggar. There was a time when I walked into rooms and people actually listened when I spoke. When my opinions mattered. When I had a name that meant something beyond pity or obligation. My husband Richard and I built our life together from scratch. We started with nothing but a beat-up truck and a dream to manage land contracts in our county. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. We'd wake up at 5 in the morning, drive out to properties, negotiate deals, shake hands with farmers and developers. We were partners in every sense of the word. When Richard died at 47, sudden heart attack, no warning, I thought the grief would kill me too. My son Thomas was only 16. The business paperwork looked like a foreign language. I'd always handled the people side of things while Richard managed the legal details. Now I was drowning in documents I couldn't understand, trying to be both mother and father to a teenage boy, trying to keep food on the table. That's when Richard's brother Marcus stepped in. Smooth talker, expensive suits, law degree from some fancy university. He showed up at my door with sympathy in his eyes and solutions in his briefcase. "Seraphine, you don't need to handle this alone," he told me, sitting at my kitchen table like a savior. "I'll take care of everything. You just focus on Thomas and healing. Sign where I tell you to sign, and I'll make sure you're taken care of." I trusted him. God help me, I trusted him completely. Every week he'd come by with new papers. Transfer documents. Partnership restructures. Estate settlements. He'd point to the signature lines with his gold pen and say things like, "This is just updating the beneficiary clauses," or "We're consolidating assets for tax purposes," or "This protects Thomas's inheritance." I signed everything. Every single page he put in front of me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known because grief makes you stupid and desperate, was that with each signature, I was erasing myself from my own life. The business Richard and I built? Transferred to a management trust, controlled by Marcus. The properties we owned? Restructured under corporate entities where I had no voting rights. Even the modest savings account we'd built together? Somehow redirected into funds I couldn't access without trustee approval. By the time I realized something was wrong, it was too late. Marcus had painted me as unstable, unable to handle business decisions, too emotional to manage finances. He did it quietly, carefully, in conversations I wasn't part of. With lawyers I never met. In meetings I didn't know were happening. And the worst part? He convinced my own son that he was protecting me. That I needed to be handled with kid gloves. That giving me too much responsibility would stress me out and make my grief worse. Thomas started looking at me differently. Like I was fragile. Like I was a burden. Like I was someone who needed to be managed rather than respected. I remember the day I finally understood what had happened. I was 53 years old, sitting in a county clerk's office, trying to get copies of property deeds for our old parcels. The woman behind the counter looked at me with confusion. "Ma'am, you're not listed as an owner on any of these properties. According to our records, you haven't been for almost 5 years." 5 years. Marcus had been slowly stealing my life for 5 years, and I'd handed him the pen to do it. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been gutted. Everything Richard and I worked for, gone. My financial independence, gone. My dignity, gone. I'd become exactly what Marcus whispered to everyone I was, a dependent woman who couldn't manage on her own. That's when the labels started. Needy. Unstable. Difficult. And eventually, the one my daughter-in-law would use at the wedding, beggar. But here's what they didn't count on. Grief doesn't erase intelligence. And shame doesn't erase memory. Somewhere deep inside me, underneath all that pain and humiliation, I remembered who I used to be. I remembered the woman who built a business from nothing. Who negotiated tough deals. Who never backed down from a challenge. That woman wasn't dead. She was just buried. And she was about to claw her way back to the surface. Have you ever trusted someone who completely betrayed you? Someone who used your pain against you? Drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. The shoebox sat in the back of my closet for almost 3 years before I opened it again. Dark green cardboard, corners worn soft from handling, tied with a piece of string Richard had knotted himself. Inside were the drafts, the handwritten notes, the original contracts from when we first started the business. I'd avoided looking at them because they hurt too much. Every page was a memory. Richard's handwriting, those firm strokes, the way he flourished every capital letter like he was signing something important. His notes in the margins. Coffee stains from late-night planning sessions at our kitchen table. But one night, after another humiliating family dinner where Thomas barely spoke to me and Marcus acted like the benevolent patriarch, I pulled that box down. My hands shook as I untied the string. The first document I pulled out was a partnership agreement. Richard's handwriting across the top, Delacroix Land Management, founding documents. I remembered this one. We'd worked on it together, arguing about percentages and responsibilities, laughing about how official we were trying to sound. Then I found the copies Marcus had given me to sign years ago. The updated versions, he said, were just cleaner, more professional. They weren't the same. Not even close. In Richard's original draft, I was listed as equal partner with full decision-making authority. In Marcus's version, I was listed as dependent beneficiary with no voting rights. Richard's version specified that all major decisions required my approval. Marcus's version gave complete control to a management trustee, which turned out to be Marcus himself. My heart started pounding. I spread both documents on my bed, comparing them line by line. The differences weren't subtle. They were massive. Deliberate. Calculated. But here's what made my blood run cold: the dates. Marcus's version was dated 3 weeks after Richard's funeral. But Richard had been working on these documents right up until he died. I found his notes dated just 2 days before his heart attack. Which meant Marcus's updated version wasn't an update at all. It was a complete rewrite designed to cut me out. I grabbed my laptop, the ancient thing that took 5 minutes to start up, and found the digital copies Marcus had emailed me years ago. The ones he said to keep for my records. I didn't know much about computers, but I knew enough to check when a file was created. I right-clicked, looked at the properties, found the metadata. The documents Marcus claimed were originals had been created 2 months after I signed them. Someone had backdated them. Made it look like they existed before Richard died, when really they'd been manufactured specifically to steal from me. I sat there on my bed at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers, my whole body shaking. Not from fear. From rage. Marcus hadn't just taken advantage of my grief. He'd planned this. Systematically. Carefully. He'd waited until I was most vulnerable, then erased me from my own life with forged documents and fake dates and lies that sounded like protection. I pulled out more documents. Property transfers signed on days I was in the hospital recovering from pneumonia. I had the discharge papers to prove it. Signatures that slanted left when mine always leaned right. Financial statements with numbers that didn't match the handwritten ledgers Richard and I kept. Every piece of paper told the same story. I'd been set up, robbed, erased. But now I had proof. Real, tangible, documented proof that someone had manufactured my disappearance. The question was, what could I possibly do about it? I had no money for lawyers. My son wouldn't believe me. Marcus had spent years building a reputation as the responsible one, the competent one, while painting me as the unstable widow who couldn't handle reality. Who would listen to the woman they all called a beggar? What would you do if you discovered your whole life had been stolen on paper? Keep watching, because what happens next changes everything. The library workshop was my last resort. Estate law for beginners, held every Tuesday evening in the community room that smelled like old books and burned coffee. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers, admitting I didn't understand basic legal concepts, felt like another layer of humiliation piled on top of everything else. But I went anyway. Because pride doesn't pay bills or prove fraud. There were maybe 15 people there. Mostly older folks like me, clutching folders and looking lost. The presenter was talking about probate procedures when a woman in the back row interrupted him. "That's wrong," she said flatly. "The statute of limitations doesn't work that way in contested estates." Everyone turned to look at her. She was maybe 70, with steel-gray hair cut short and sharp eyes behind thick-framed glasses. She wore a cardigan that had seen better days and carried herself like someone who'd spent a lifetime not caring what people thought of her. The presenter stuttered through a correction. The woman, Mireille, I'd learn later, nodded like she'd expected nothing less. After the workshop, I worked up the courage to approach her. She was packing papers into a worn leather briefcase that looked older than both of us combined. "Excuse me," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "You said you knew about contested estates?" She looked up at me with those sharp eyes. 30 years as a paralegal before I retired. Why? I don't know what made me trust her. Maybe it was the way she'd corrected that presenter without apology. Maybe it was the fact that she looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem. Maybe I was just desperate enough to take any lifeline offered. "I think someone stole my life," I said. On paper. With documents I signed but didn't understand. Most people would have made excuses. Offered sympathy. Suggested I was confused or mistaken. Mireille just tilted her head slightly. "Show me," she said. We met at a coffee shop 3 days later. I brought everything, the shoebox, the printed emails, the documents with their suspicious dates. I spread them across the table between us, my hands shaking. Mireille didn't touch them right away. She just looked at the pile, then at me. "How long?" she asked. "Almost 8 years since my husband died. Maybe 5 since I realized something was wrong." "And you're just now fighting back?" The question could have been cruel, but it wasn't. It was just honest. "I didn't know how," I admitted. "I still don't." Mireille picked up the first document. Then another. Then another. She read in silence for almost 20 minutes while I sat there trying not to cry into my cold coffee. Finally, she set the papers down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Paper trails don't lie," she said. "People do. And whoever did this to you left a trail a mile wide." She tapped one of the documents. "See this notarization? County clerks keep logs. We can verify if you actually appeared before this notary on this date." She picked up another. "And this signature? We can get it analyzed, compared to verified samples." Hope sparked in my chest for the first time in years. "You think I can prove it?" "I think you can burn their house down," Mireille said calmly. "Metaphorically speaking. But it's going to take work. Real work. Are you ready for that?" I thought about my daughter-in-law calling me a beggar. About Marcus's smug smile. About my son looking at me like I was an obligation instead of his mother. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Mireille nodded once. "All business. Good. First thing we do is request certified copies of every filing from the county clerk. Everything with your name on it. Then we start building a timeline. Then we find every discrepancy, every backdated document, every forged signature." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. "This is going to take months. Maybe years. You prepared for that?" "I've got nothing but time," I told her. "Wrong," Mireille said, looking up at me with something that might have been a smile. "You've got something much more valuable than time. You've got rage and evidence. That's a combination that moves mountains." And soon, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, my stolen life reappeared on paper. Would you have the courage to fight back even when everyone thinks you're crazy? Hit that like button if you're rooting for Seraphine. Darren O'Say didn't look like someone who could topple an empire. He was maybe 28, showed up to our first meeting in a hoodie and jeans, carrying a laptop covered in stickers from bands I'd never heard of. Mireille had found him through a former colleague. Apparently he specialized in digital forensics for law firms. "So you need someone to dig into document metadata?" he asked, setting up his laptop on Mireille's dining room table. We'd started meeting there every week, spreading papers across every surface like we were planning a heist. "We need proof these documents were created after the dates they claim," Mireille explained. "Can you do that?" Darren grinned. "Can I do that? Lady, I can tell you what kind of computer created them, what version of software was used, who edited them, and probably what they had for breakfast that day." He wasn't exaggerating. Over the next 3 months, Darren tore apart every digital document Marcus had ever sent me. He explained things I'd never even thought about. How PDF files contain hidden information, how every computer leaves a fingerprint, how editing software tracks every single change. "Look at this," he said one evening, turning his laptop toward me. "This property transfer? The one supposedly signed in June 2019. The one Marcus said we needed for tax purposes," I confirmed. "It was created in September 2019. 3 months later. See this?" He pointed at a screen full of numbers and codes that meant nothing to me. "The metadata doesn't lie. This file didn't exist in June. Someone created it later and changed the visible date." My stomach twisted. "So it's fake." "It's worse than fake. It's deliberate fraud." Darren clicked through more screens. "And check this out, the IP address that created this file? It traces back to a law office in downtown. Same office where your brother-in-law works." Mireille leaned forward. "Can you prove that definitively?" "Already did. I've got logs, timestamps, IP records. This wasn't some accident or misunderstanding. Someone at that office systematically created backdated documents designed to strip you of your assets." The evidence kept piling up. Documents signed while I was hospitalized. Darren found the hospital records proving I was physically elsewhere. Signatures that didn't match. He connected us with a forensic handwriting analyst who confirmed they weren't mine. Financial transfers made at 2 in the morning from computers I'd never touched. Your brother-in-law got sloppy, Darren explained. Probably thought you'd never question anything. Thought you didn't understand technology well enough to catch him. But he left evidence everywhere. We built spreadsheets. Timelines. A massive wall chart in Mireille's spare bedroom connecting dates and documents and discrepancies. Every meeting revealed something new, some fresh piece of evidence that Marcus had manufactured my erasure. How much are we talking about? I asked one night, after Darren had finished explaining another fraudulent transfer. Total, how much did they take? Mireille and Darren exchanged glances. Based on property values and asset transfers? Mireille said carefully. Conservative estimate? Around $4 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. 4 million. Richard and I had built something worth $4 million, and Marcus had stolen every penny while pretending to help me. But here's the thing, Darren added quickly. This isn't just about money. This is about systematic fraud. Identity theft. Forgery. We're talking potential criminal charges, not just civil lawsuits. I don't want him in jail, I said quietly. Both of them looked at me in surprise. I just want back what's mine. What Richard and I built together. You might not have a choice, Mireille said. Once we present this evidence, authorities will have to act. This is too big to ignore. The weight of it settled over me. I'd started this journey just trying to prove I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined being erased. Now we were talking about destroying Marcus's career. Possibly his freedom. Part of me felt guilty. He was family after all. Richard's brother. But then I remembered Thomas looking at me with pity. Remembered sitting alone in my tiny apartment while Marcus lived in the house Richard and I had built. Remembered my daughter-in-law calling me a beggar while wearing jewelry worth more than my yearly income. What's our next move? I asked. Mireille smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. We take this to court. File for an emergency injunction to freeze all remaining assets. Force them to respond. And then we watch their empire crumble. Now I had evidence strong enough to topple an empire. But I wasn't ready for what it would cost. Is revenge worth it if it destroys your family? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Seraphine goes to war. The courthouse steps felt steeper than they should have. Mireille walked beside me, carrying a briefcase stuffed with evidence. Darren had sent everything digitally to our lawyer, but Mireille insisted on hard copies. Judges are old school, she'd said. They like paper they can hold. Our lawyer was a woman named Patricia Vance, mid-50s, no nonsense, came recommended by one of Mireille's old colleagues. She'd taken one look at our evidence and agreed to work partially on contingency, which meant I could actually afford her. They're going to fight this, Patricia warned me that morning. Your brother-in-law has resources. Connections. He'll make you look unstable, emotional, vindictive. Let him try, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. The hearing was for a temporary injunction, a legal freeze on any remaining properties tied to Richard's estate. If the judge granted it, Marcus couldn't sell, transfer, or touch anything until the case was fully reviewed. It was a small thing, but it would be my first real win. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Marcus sat on the opposite side with two expensive-looking lawyers. He didn't look at me. Just stared straight ahead like I didn't exist, which was probably the strategy his attorneys had coached him on. Thomas sat behind Marcus. My own son, sitting on the other side of the aisle. That hurt worse than anything Marcus could do. The judge was a black woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose. Judge Anderson. She looked tired, like she'd seen every kind of family drama there was and wasn't impressed by any of it. Patricia presented our case efficiently. Showed the timeline discrepancies. The metadata evidence. The hospital records proving I couldn't have signed documents on certain dates. She kept it simple, factual, letting the evidence speak. Marcus's lead attorney stood up. Tall guy, silver hair, expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He painted me exactly as Patricia had predicted. Grief-stricken widow, confused, looking for someone to blame, trying to undo legal decisions I'd made years ago. Your Honor, Mrs. Delacroix was thoroughly counseled at every step of this process. She signed these documents willingly, with full understanding. Now, years later, suffering from what appears to be buyer's remorse, she's attempting to rewrite history. I gripped the edge of my chair. Mireille's hand found mine under the table, squeezed once. Judge Anderson looked at the evidence. Looked at Marcus. Looked at me. The silence stretched so long I thought I might scream. I'm granting the temporary injunction, she said finally. All assets related to the Delacroix estate are frozen pending full investigation. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a comprehensive hearing. The gavel came down. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what had just happened. Patricia was smiling, gathering papers. Mireille squeezed my hand again, harder this time. We'd won. It was temporary, limited, just a first step, but we'd won. Marcus's face had gone red. His lawyers were already whispering urgently to him. And Thomas was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock, maybe. Or the first crack in whatever story Marcus had been telling him all these years. Outside the courthouse, Patricia laid out what came next. They'll try to settle now. Offer you something to make this go away quietly. Do not take it. We have them cornered and they know it. What if they don't settle? I asked. Then we go to trial. Air everything publicly. And trust me, they don't want that. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like I could breathe without something crushing my chest. The ground had stopped slipping away. I was standing on solid earth again, and it was earth I'd fought to reclaim. But the courtroom was only the beginning. The true battle was waiting at my son's wedding. Would you have the courage to take your own family to court? Hit like if you think Seraphine is doing the right thing, and keep watching because the wedding showdown is going to blow your mind. The wedding invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I could bring myself to open it. Cream-colored cardstock, fancy calligraphy, Thomas Delacroix and Charlotte Hartwell request the honor of your presence. The date was circled in red, 6 months after the injunction hearing. Thomas had barely spoken to me since that day in court. A few strained phone calls where he asked why I was doing this to the family. One awkward coffee meeting where he couldn't look me in the eye. He was getting married and I was the complication nobody wanted to deal with. You should go, Mireille said when I called her, voice shaking. You're his mother. He doesn't want me there. Charlotte definitely doesn't want me there. Then go anyway. Show up. Let them see you're not ashamed. Not hiding. But I was ashamed. That was the problem. 8 years of being called needy, unstable, a burden. You don't shake that off just because a judge granted an injunction. The labels stick to your skin like tar. I bought a dress from a consignment shop. Nothing fancy, just something that wouldn't embarrass Thomas. Navy blue, simple cut, the kind of thing that helps you blend into the background. That's all I wanted, to attend my son's wedding without causing problems. The night before, I almost called to say I was sick. Sat with my phone in my hand for an hour, trying to work up the courage to lie. But Mireille's words kept echoing. Sometimes silence in the right moment is the loudest roar. I didn't fully understand what she meant until later. The wedding was at some country club I'd never heard of, rolling lawns, white tents, everything dripping with money. I felt out of place the moment I pulled into the parking lot in my 15-year-old sedan. Valet parking attendants looked at my car like it might have a disease. Inside, everyone was beautiful and expensive. Women in designer dresses, men in tailored suits, champagne flowing like water. I found my seat, way in the back naturally, and tried to be invisible. The ceremony was beautiful. Thomas looked handsome in his tuxedo, though I could see Richard in every angle of his face. Charlotte was stunning, all perfect hair and practiced smile. When they said their vows, I cried quietly into a tissue, mourning everything that had been lost between us. At the reception, I stayed at my table. Didn't approach Thomas, didn't try to insert myself into family photos. Just sat there, sipping water, watching my son celebrate the biggest day of his life with people who'd rather I wasn't there. That's when Charlotte found me. She was already tipsy, champagne loosening whatever filter she normally kept on her cruelty. Her parents trailed behind her, Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, both dressed like old money and wearing expressions of polite superiority. "There you are," Charlotte said too loudly. "I've been telling my parents all about you." My stomach dropped. I stood up automatically, smoothing my consignment shop dress, trying to look presentable. "Mom, Dad," Charlotte continued, grabbing my arm with fingers that dug in too hard, "this is that annoying beggar we are forced to put up with." The words physically hurt, like being slapped in front of a room full of people. And the laughter, God, the laughter that followed. Charlotte's friends, nearby guests, even her mother let out a delicate chuckle behind her manicured hand. I wanted to disappear, to cease existing right there on the ballroom floor. But I didn't. I stood there and took it, because what else could I do? And that's when everything changed. I decided to go. And that choice would change everything. Have you ever had to face people who humiliated you, knowing you'd come out on top eventually? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because what happens next is the sweetest justice you'll ever see. Mr. Hartwell wasn't laughing anymore. His face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, shock, and now something that looked like horror. He was staring at me like I was a ghost he'd thought was safely buried. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the scattered laughter. "Aren't you Seraphine Delacroix?" Charlotte's grip on my arm loosened slightly. "Dad, this is just Thomas's mom. She's the investor who bought controlling interest in Hartwell Industries last year," her father finished, his voice getting stronger. "The one who saved us from bankruptcy when the merger was falling apart." The silence that fell over our corner of the reception was so complete I could hear champagne bubbles popping in nearby glasses. Charlotte's face went from flushed pink to paper white in seconds. Her mother's polite smile froze and cracked like old porcelain. Other guests nearby had stopped their conversations, sensing drama more interesting than small talk. "That's impossible," Charlotte stammered, her fingers falling away from my arm completely. "She can't be, she doesn't have." But her father wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at me with dawning respect mixed with embarrassment. "Miss Delacroix, I had no idea you were Thomas's mother. We've been trying to arrange a meeting with you for months. Your representative said you preferred to remain anonymous." I could have been cruel. Could have thrown Charlotte's words back at her, made a scene, ruined the entire reception. Years of humiliation were boiling in my chest, begging for release. Instead, I smiled. Small, calm, controlled. "It's nice to finally meet you properly, Mr. Hartwell. Your daughter has told me so much about your family." The weight of that statement settled over everyone within earshot. I'd known exactly who they were this whole time. I'd sat through the insults, the dismissal, the cruel laughter, all while holding cards nobody knew were in play. Charlotte looked like she might be sick. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how pale she'd gone. I don't understand. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. You never flaunted what I had. I finished gently. No, I didn't. I learned a long time ago that real power doesn't need to announce itself. Mrs. Hartwell had found her voice. Charles, what is she talking about? What investment? Mr. Hartwell tugged at his collar. Last year, when we were facing hostile takeover, an anonymous investor purchased enough shares to block it. Saved the company. Saved our family legacy. That investor was Ms. Delacroix. The whispers started then, spreading through the reception like wildfire. I could see people pulling out phones, probably searching my name. My son stood across the room with a group of groomsmen, his face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been shame. Charlotte tried to recover, letting out a laugh that sounded more like choking. This is ridiculous. Dad, you must be confused. This is just... I'm not confused, Charlotte. Her father's voice had gone cold. And if I were you, I'd apologize to Ms. Delacroix immediately. Apologize? For what? I was just joking. Everyone knew I was. Calling your husband's mother a beggar? I said quietly. Yes, everyone heard that joke. Very funny. Charlotte's mother grabbed her daughter's arm, hissing something too low for me to hear. Charlotte's eyes were filling with tears, not sad tears, angry ones. The kind that come when your world is falling apart and you can't control it. Marcus appeared at the edge of the group, his face tight with barely controlled rage. He'd heard everything. Our eyes met across the small crowd that had gathered, and I saw him realize that this wasn't an accident. That I'd planned this. That his carefully constructed lies about the unstable, dependent widow were crumbling in real time. Thomas pushed through the crowd toward us. Mom? What's going on? What is Mr. Hartwell talking about? I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years without the filter of shame or defensiveness. We should talk, I said simply. Somewhere private. There's a lot you don't know. She's manipulating you, Marcus called out, his polished veneer finally cracking. Don't listen to her lies, Thomas. She's been trying to destroy this family for months. Destroy it. Mireille's voice came from behind me. I hadn't even seen her arrive. She walked up carrying a leather folder, her sharp eyes fixed on Marcus. Or expose it. There's a difference. What he said next turned my daughter-in-law's world upside down. The truth is about to explode. Don't go anywhere because you need to see what happens when all the lies finally collapse. The hotel manager offered us a private room, probably desperate to move the drama away from the reception. Thomas, Charlotte, her parents, Marcus, Mireille, and I ended up in some conference room with bad fluorescent lighting and the lingering smell of stale coffee. Charlotte sat as far from me as possible, mascara running down her face. Her mother kept patting her hand uselessly. Mr. Hartwell looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Marcus stood near the door, arms crossed, jaw tight. Thomas paced. Somebody explain what the hell is happening. Mom, you bought Mr. Hartwell's company? How? You live in a studio apartment. You drive a car from 2010. Because that's all I needed, I said simply. Everything else I invested. Invested with what money? You're always asking me for help with bills. That one stung, but it was fair. I asked you for help twice in 8 years, Thomas. Both times for medical expenses insurance didn't cover. That's it. But yes, I let you believe I was struggling because, I paused, choosing words carefully. Because it was easier than explaining what your uncle did. Marcus's voice cut in, sharp. Here we go. More paranoid delusions about how everyone conspired against you. Paranoid. Mireille pulled documents from her folder. These are certified copies from the county clerk. Want to explain why Seraphine's signature appears on property transfers dated June 15, 2019, when hospital records show she was admitted with pneumonia from June 12 to June 18. Silence. Or how about this one? Mireille continued, her voice like a scalpel. Partnership dissolution signed at 10 a.m. on March 3, 2018. Except the notary's log shows no appointment with Seraphine that day. In fact, the notary was in court all morning. Public record. Thomas stopped pacing. What is she saying? I'm saying your uncle forged your mother's signature on documents designed to steal everything she and your father built together. Mireille laid out more papers. We have metadata proving documents were backdated. Handwriting analysis confirming signature forgery. Digital forensics showing edits made from your uncle's office computer. Marcus's face had gone red. Those are lies. Fabrications. She paid people to create fake evidence because she can't accept that she willingly signed over. At 2:17 a.m. on September 9, 2019, Mireille interrupted, reading from a paper. Someone using a computer registered to Delacroix and Associates Law Office created a property transfer document and backdated it to April 2019. The IP address traces directly to your desk, Marcus. We have the logs. Lots of people use that office. It could have been anyone. At 2 in the morning, using your login credentials. Mireille smiled without humor. The IT department keeps excellent records. Thomas turned to Marcus. Uncle Marcus, what is she talking about? Your mother is confused. Grief-stricken. She's been manipulated by these people into believing. I saw the original documents, I said quietly. In your father's handwriting, Thomas. Partnership agreements that listed me as equal partner. Property deeds with both our names. I compared them to the versions Marcus gave me to sign. They're completely different. She's misremembering. The grief distorted her memory of. We have the originals, Mireille said flatly. Dated, witnessed, notarized properly. Want to compare them to your versions in front of a judge. The room went silent except for Charlotte's sniffling. Mr. Hartwell was staring at Marcus with undisguised disgust. Mrs. Hartwell looked like she might faint. Thomas's voice came out strangled. You told me Mom couldn't handle the business. That she was too emotional, too unstable. You said giving her control would stress her out. I was protecting her. Protecting both of you. By stealing $4 million? Thomas's voice rose. By forging her signature? By making me think my own mother was incompetent. 4 million. Charlotte's voice was tiny. Did you say 4 million? Conservative estimate, Mireille confirmed. Property values, business assets, investment accounts, all transferred illegally from Seraphine to entities controlled by Marcus. Marcus's polished mask finally shattered completely. You ungrateful, I kept this family together. I managed everything while she fell apart. I made hard decisions to protect Thomas's inheritance. You stole my inheritance, Thomas said, his voice shaking. You stole hers. And you made me complicit by convincing me she was the problem. Charlotte stood up suddenly. I need air. I can't. This is supposed to be my wedding day. She looked at me with something between hatred and fear. You planned this. You knew what would happen when Daddy recognized you. You orchestrated this whole thing. No, I said honestly. I just showed up to my son's wedding. Your father recognized me. That's all. But you bought his company. You knew. I bought it because it was a good investment. I didn't know you were the daughter until Thomas introduced us 3 months ago. By then, the deal was already done. I paused. Though I'll admit, watching you treat me like garbage while your father's company survived because of my money was educational. And that was when they realized I didn't need their approval. I already held their fate in my hands. The empire is crumbling. Stay tuned because the final chapter reveals how this all ends, and it's not what you'd expect. The legal settlement took 6 months to finalize. Marcus's lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, he agreed to return everything, adjusted for fair market value with interest. I didn't push for criminal charges. Despite everything, he was still Richard's brother, and some part of me remembered the man he used to be before greed poisoned him. Thomas came to see me 2 weeks after the wedding. Showed up at my studio apartment looking like he hadn't slept. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, the same one I'd eaten breakfast at alone for years, and talked for 5 hours. He apologized. I accepted. But we both knew it would take time to rebuild what had been broken. Trust doesn't heal overnight. Why didn't you tell me? He asked at one point. Why let me think you were struggling? Would you have believed me? I countered gently. Marcus spent years painting me as unstable. You loved him. Trusted him. If I'd come to you with accusations, whose side would you have taken? Thomas's silence was answer enough. Charlotte filed for divorce 4 months later. Turns out marrying someone for family status gets complicated when your new mother-in-law owns your father's company and your credibility is destroyed. Thomas was heartbroken, but also relieved. Some marriages aren't meant to survive their foundations crumbling. Mr. Hartwell sent me a formal letter of apology. His wife wrote a separate one. I accepted both but declined their invitation to family dinners. Some bridges are better left unbuilt. The money from the settlement allowed me to move into a real house. Nothing fancy, just a small place with a garden where I could grow tomatoes like Richard and I used to. I kept the old car. It runs fine. Mireille and I still meet every Tuesday, though now it's for coffee instead of legal strategy sessions. She's teaching me to play chess. I'm terrible at it, but it's nice having a friend who saw me at my lowest and never looked away. Darren used our case to launch a digital forensics business. He's doing well, helps other people uncover fraud. Sometimes I get emails from people who heard my story and found the courage to fight back against their own erasures. The thing about justice is that it's quieter than people expect. No dramatic courtroom speeches. No public vindication that makes everything suddenly perfect. Just slow, steady reclamation of what was stolen. Just choosing, every single day, to believe you deserve the truth even when everyone around you says you're crazy. I see Thomas every Sunday now. We're careful with each other, still learning how to be mother and son without the weight of Marcus's lies between us. Last week, he asked about his father, real questions, not the sanitized stories he'd been told. We sat in my garden and I told him about the man Richard actually was, flawed, funny, devoted, human. Some people asked if I regret how everything unfolded. If I wish I'd confronted Marcus privately instead of letting it explode at the wedding. Honestly? No. Charlotte needed to see that cruelty has consequences. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell needed to know who they were really dealing with. And I needed to stand in that ballroom, absorbing their laughter, and emerge still standing. Because here's what I learned through all of this: being erased doesn't start with signatures and documents. It starts the moment you accept someone else's story about who you are. The moment you believe you're the burden, the beggar, the problem. Fighting back isn't about revenge or money or public humiliation. It's about refusing to disappear. It's about looking at evidence, paper trails, timestamps, your own memories, and trusting what you see even when everyone says you're wrong. I'm 71 now. I wear my age in the lines around my eyes and the silver in my hair. I'm not wealthy in the way Charlotte's family defines wealth, but I'm comfortable. More importantly, I'm free. Free from labels that never fit. Free from shame I never earned. Free to be exactly who I always was underneath all the lies. Richard would be proud. Not because I won, but because I refused to stay erased. Because I remembered that the woman who built a business from nothing was still in there, just buried under grief and manipulation. She was always there. She just needed evidence, allies, and the courage to trust herself again. The loudest justice, I've learned, is often the quietest. It's the sound of a judge's gavel granting an injunction, the rustle of documents proving fraud, the silence that falls when lies finally run out of oxygen. It doesn't need to scream. It just needs to exist, steady and undeniable. And in the end, that's enough. If this story moved you, if you've ever been dismissed or erased or told you were crazy for trusting your own truth, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next powerful story of resilience and justice. And please drop your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to find their courage. We're building a community here of people who refuse to stay silent, who believe in fighting back with evidence and patience and truth. Join us. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And you are never, ever alone in this fight. Thank you for watching, and remember, the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. Retry.